It was the night of December 20th, 1987. The Tablas Strait, Philippines. A thick pitch-black darkness blanketed the narrow strait where the waves lapped against the hull like a gentle, deadly lullaby. In that silence, the MV Doña Paz loomed large, slicing through the waves, carrying the joy of thousands of people on their way home for Christmas. None of them, from the children sound asleep in their mother's arms to the elderly squinting their eyes at the distant horizon, knew that they were drifting through the final journey of their lives. People often speak of the Titanic as the ultimate symbol of maritime disaster, with over 1,500 lives lost. But that night, in these Southeast Asian waters, a tragedy far more horrific was waiting to unfold. It did not come from a cold iceberg, but from an inferno from hell that would scorch the very face of the sea. This is the story of the Doña Paz, the vessel dubbed the Titanic of Asia, and the mass grave of over 4,300 restless souls. To understand the scale of this tragedy, we must look at the social context of the Philippines in the late 80s. Back then, maritime transport was the lifeblood connecting thousands of islands, and the Doña Paz, owned by Sulpicio Lines, was one of the largest ferries, serving the route from Leyte and Samar to the capital, Manila. According to its registration, the Doña Paz had a maximum capacity of 1,518 passengers. However, on that fateful night, the actual number was a terrifying mystery. Being the last voyage before Christmas, demand skyrocketed. Black market tickets were sold rampantly. Passengers sneaked aboard without being recorded on the manifest. Survivors recalled that the ship was so crowded there wasn't a single inch of standing room left. Corridors, decks, stairwells, and even the area near the engine room were jammed tight with people. Children slept scattered across the aisles. Suitcases and cargo were piled high. It was a literal sardine can, floating in the middle of the ocean with over 4,000 beating hearts, 3 times its allowable load. This overloading was not just a safety violation, it was a death warrant signed in advance for thousands should anything go wrong. While the Doña Paz struggled to weave through the Tablas Strait from the opposite direction, a silent threat was approaching: the oil tanker MT Vector. If the Doña Paz represented human chaos, the Vector represented systemic negligence. This ship was transporting 8,800 barrels of gasoline and other flammable petroleum products. The terrifying part? The Vector was operating illegally. Its license had expired, the captain lacked the proper credentials, and most critically, it had no proper lookout. On the vast, dark sea, 2 giant vessels hurtled toward each other like 2 blind giants. The Doña Paz had no effective radar, and the Vector was like a phantom with no clear signal lights. Fate had arranged for them a rendezvous with death at coordinates 12 degrees north, right in the middle of the Tablas Strait. The collision occurred around 10:30 p.m. It wasn't a simple crash where a ship is punctured and slowly sinks. The impact between the Vector's bow and the Doña Paz's flank ignited the 8,800 barrels of fuel. Boom! An explosion ripped through the night, shaking the very heavens and earth. Flames erupted instantly. But the most horrifying part was not the fire on the ship, but the fire on the water. Thousands of tons of oil spilled out, caught fire, and spread at breakneck speed, turning a vast stretch of the ocean into a giant burning cauldron. On the Doña Paz, chaos erupted faster than the flames. The lights went out. Screams, cries, and the sound of crashing metal created a symphony of despair. Survivors recounted a haunting scene. People ran wildly in the dark, trampling one another. But where could they run? Behind them was fire. In front of them was the sea. But the sea itself was burning. One of the most heartbreaking and damnable details of this tragedy was that the life vest lockers were locked tight. The crew was in panic, offering no guidance whatsoever. The captain was reportedly watching a movie or drinking beer in his cabin when the accident happened. The passengers were left to fend for themselves. Imagine standing on a scorching deck. Fire is licking at your heels. You have to make a decision no human should ever have to face: burn to death on the ship or jump into a sea of fire. Most chose to jump. Paquito Osabel, one of the few survivors, recalled that terrifying moment. I saw the sea was burning, but the heat on the ship was unbearable. I closed my eyes and jumped. When they plunged into the water, they were not welcomed by the cooling embrace of the ocean, but by boiling oil. Many died the moment they touched the water due to thermal burns or smoke inhalation. Those lucky enough to dive deep below the burning layer had to swim far out, surfacing to gasp for scorching air, then diving back down. Around them, bodies floated bobbing in the water, charred black like burnt logs. The cries for help faded, replaced by the crackling of fire and the groaning of the giant ship as it buckled and broke. In just 2 hours, the Doña Paz sank completely to the ocean floor, taking thousands trapped inside with it. The Vector shared the same fate shortly after. The next morning, when the sun rose, the Tablas Strait looked like a battlefield. But not a battlefield of guns and bullets, but of total annihilation. Rescue forces arrived too late. It took 8 hours after the accident for authorities to receive a full report. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found only a few people gasping for life, clinging to debris. Total survivors? 24 people, only 24 from the Doña Paz and 2 from the Vector. So, what was the death toll? Initially, Sulpicio Lines released a figure based on the passenger manifest, 1,500 people. But as bodies washed ashore in the days that followed, the naked truth was exposed. Thousands of bodies had no names on the list. There were families of 10 who traveled together but bought only one ticket or bribed the staff to get on board. Independent investigations and international organizations later determined the actual casualty count to be between 4,341 to 4,386 people. For comparison, the Titanic disaster claimed about 1,514 lives. The Doña Paz disaster claimed nearly 3 times that amount. It officially became the deadliest maritime disaster in peacetime history. Why could such a horrific tragedy occur? When dissecting the accident from a management and technical perspective, we see a chain of systemic failures, greed, and overloading. The Doña Paz was grossly overloaded. Packing passengers like sardines not only reduced the ship's buoyancy when breached, but made evacuation impossible. Escape routes were blocked by human bodies and luggage. Crew irresponsibility. There was no one properly manning the bridge at the time of the collision. Life vest lockers were locked, a common practice among budget liners to prevent theft, but an act of murder when disaster strikes. Vector's deplorable condition, a ship carrying dangerous cargo, fuel, operating without a license, without lights, and without qualified pilots. It was like a time bomb drifting freely at sea. Rescue delay, outdated communication systems, and the sluggish response protocols of the Philippine Coast Guard at the time robbed the victims of any chance of survival during the first few critical hours. The Doña Paz case dragged on for decades with protracted legal battles. Sulpicio Lines was eventually ruled to be at fault, but the compensation, about $400 per victim at the time, could never make up for the pain of those left behind. The most painful part of the Doña Paz tragedy lies not just in the 4,000 deaths, but in the forgetting. If the Titanic is remembered by the world with glamour, tragedy, and blockbuster movies, the Doña Paz faded into oblivion as a poor man's accident. Its victims were common laborers, farmers, and children longing for a warm Christmas. They died in the dark, amidst a boiling sea of oil, with no band playing a final song, only the screams of despair. The lesson of the Doña Paz remains valid to this day. Maritime safety is not written in ink on paper, it is written in blood. Whenever greed overrides safety rules, whenever negligence is tolerated, the Grim Reaper waits to open a new dance upon the high seas. The surface of the Tablas Strait is blue again. The oil slicks have long since dissipated. But deep beneath the ocean floor, the wreck of the Doña Paz still lies there, an eternal and tragic monument to the Christmas dreams that never came true.